Hey, FarmBoys podcast audience, subscribers, and anybody who may be watching this podcast. I just want to take a few seconds here to tell you thank you. I appreciate all the subscribers, all the thumbs up, and all the people that take time to watch this podcast. We do our best to try to bring on interesting guests that have maybe a different point of view than I do, than you do. So just know that I may not agree with all my guests. You may not agree with all my guests, but that's okay because we want to bring people on here who can speak intelligently about the topics that are important to us today and have some good evidence or backing that defends our argument. And my job is to not debate necessarily yet. We're not there yet, but to definitely ask the right questions and ask questions that you want to know that maybe Google isn't telling you the answer to, or ChatGPT yet, and you want to hear it from an actual human still. So that's my job, and that's what I'm going to strive to do, is ask the best questions to the best guests with the topics that matter today. So thank you all. I appreciate it, and welcome to the FarmBoys podcast. Smash that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and like the video. FarmBoys podcast merch is here. For the first time ever, we've got exclusive, original, one-of-a-kind FarmBoys podcast t-shirts and sweatshirts. This isn't just another shirt, it's a statement. A badge of honor for those who live the farm life, hustle hard, and keep faith at the center. They are limited, so get it before it's gone. Get yours now and rep the podcast that brings farm grit to the big city. How do I get mine? Head on over to Venmo at FarmBoys Podcast, where we have your t-shirts and sweatshirts available in multiple colors. Pick your favorite, order, pay all in one place. Limited time, so grab it now. This is the FarmBoys podcast with financial economist Dr. Peter Crabb.
Well, hello, my name is Pete Crabb. I'm a professor of finance and economics at Northwest Nazarene University in Nampa, Idaho. I've been doing that since the summer of 2000, so I'm in my 25th year now. It's been a wonderful ride. NNU is a community centered on the person of Jesus Christ, and we offer a terrific educational experience, particularly because Christ is the center of what we do. So I've enjoyed my time there, opportunity to both teach and disciple lots of young people, but also to be part of the community, mostly through the editorial piece that I've been writing for the Idaho Statesman since the financial crisis of 2008. I got started with them in September of that year when Congress was passing all these bills with very strange acronyms. And so I had the opportunity to talk to our local community through that media outlet. And it's been a learning experience for me. And it's been an opportunity to take the economic theories and the financial market theories that I talk about in the classroom and put them to work, if you would, in local activity, local economy, local business practices, all of those issues. So that's me. That's what I've been doing for the last 25 years or so.
Well, that's awesome. And before you were teaching at NNU, Dr. Crabb, what were you doing before NNU?
Sure. Yeah. Prior to returning to get my doctorate in economics, I was a banker. I did both regular commercial banking, did some investment banking work for a while, and quite a long time in international banking, letters of credit, and cross-border financing.
Awesome. All right, well, let's jump straight into things. So we have a new president. One of the things that he's enacting is tariffs.
Yes.
And there are people on both sides of this. Some that are arguing that tariffs are a necessary defense against unfair trade practices. And then others are saying, well, they'll hurt Americans and American businesses more than they'll help them. So I guess in a somewhat brief description, can you explain to us what tariffs are, and then if what you're seeing, in your opinion, is helping the U.S. economy or hurting the U.S. economy?
Sure. So as you said, briefly, a tariff is a tax, but it's a tax on a particular type of transaction. The easiest example for people to understand is when you go to the store in most states in our country, you're going to pay for your goods, whatever it is, a soda or something, and and it's going to be $1, but they're going to add a sales tax on top of that. In Idaho, it's 6%, and so we pay taxes on each of those transactions. And it's a good thing for people to note that for many items in our state and others, some of those sales taxes are exempt on some of those items. But you pay that additional tax, and that's a major source of revenue for the state government. For most state governments, there's only a few states that don't have sales taxes, so it's a tax on the transaction. So a tariff is a sales tax on a particular cross-border transaction. So in addition to what you're going to pay somebody in another country in order to bring in an import, you're going to pay a tax, in this case to the United States federal government, for the privilege of being able to buy that product from some other country. So in more technical terms, it's an ad valorem tax. And so that's why you hear these tariffs being talked about as percentages. So a percent of the value. And so whatever you're going to pay a tax on the percent of the value that you're paying to that foreign supplier of what it is you're importing. So that's what a tariff is. I think it's also important to note that tariffs have been around as long as cross-border transactions have been around. Tariffs are one of the oldest types of taxes. In fact, when the U.S. was founded as a country, the United States of America, the only revenue source for the new federal government, and in 1787, its only revenue source was tariffs, taxes on transactions, just like taxes on like the tea that came into the Boston Harbor that they threw in the water. That was the source of revenue for the federal government at the time of its founding. It's been around a long time. Tariffs are nothing new, and so I think that's important for people to remember. And now going into your question about my opinion, whether good or bad, is there's an old joke attributed often to Harry Truman, is that he wanted to find a one-handed economist. Because we always tend to say on this hand and on the other hand, there's always really for looking at the economic analysis of anything, there's always this or that. There's trade-offs. There's always going to be some kind of benefit, some kind of cost associated with it. There's always going to be one side or the other with these kind of questions. So more directly, in my opinion, tariffs are neither good nor bad for the economy. Now, they themselves are a source of revenue. So on the one hand, they're neither good nor bad. They're just a way for the government to collect tax revenue and thus fund the operations that the government's going to do, whatever those may be. And so the tariff not itself are bad. When you get to the issue, we can go back to Adam Smith and Adam Smith's analysis of those countries, those nations, those societies at his time that attempted to use tariffs for a particular goal. At his time, it was called mercantilism, an ism, an ideology, a worldview. And mercantilism's idea was we're going to be better off exporting a lot and importing a little. That's how we're going to be a wealthy nation. And he showed quite forcefully that doesn't work. And that is not the source of a nation's wealth. Those nations that attempt to limit imports by taxing them more through tariffs and grow their economies through exports can't do so for a very long time. They can't sustain that. It's not a true source of wealth. The true source of wealth in those wealthy nations, as he observed both historically and during his current time, came from three sources. first, when the freedom to do what you want to do, no regulations on your type of labor or type of business that you're going to do. He simply called that self-interest, the freedom to pursue your own self-interest. Second, the opportunities to divide up the labor, to find more productive ways to do things. His example was a pin factory with about 18 different steps in his factory of creating that simple product. The division of labor of just one person trying to make a whole pin can't do it. You need all those steps. And then third, his third principle was the freedom to trade, to sell those pins to anybody they want to, or buy pins from other people if that was better for them than making the pins themselves. So that's where tariffs come into play. And so if we're going to restrict via tariffs our ability to buy and sell from others, we're necessarily going to restrict the wealth of our nation, our ability to grow. Doesn't mean we can't necessarily grow, but we're limiting our opportunities to do so through such a tariff. So again, tariffs are just a tax, but a tax on a particular item. And they're really, if that was the only way the government raised revenue, fine. That's how they raise their tax revenue. But if we're going to use it in a means to limit imports so that we can export more, that has been shown historically and theoretically both. That doesn't work, or it's at the very least not sustainable for very long.
Okay, so I guess what about the argument, and I haven't looked into this, and you may obviously know more about this, that the president makes about the richest that our country ever was is when there were heavy tariffs. Are you aware of the argument that he makes, and I guess what period of time he was talking about?
Yeah, so I'm not sure he said exactly the time he was talking about. I'm not sure those details are there, but perhaps they are. I don't know them. But I believe he's referring to, like I said, when the country was founded, that was the only source of tax revenue for the country. And so he was arguing, I believe, I can understand the argument, that the tariffs were big at that time.
Okay.
But I would disagree because the federal government didn't need that much revenue. It didn't do too much, and so those taxes were relatively minimal, and they didn't interfere with that freedom to trade that I talked about before.
Sure.
So I can't think of a time that probably in the 19th century he's probably referring to.
He always says a certain president was in power. I wish I knew it off the top of my head.
Fillmore?
That sounds something sounds right. Where he always talks about another president and how they had to make commissions and task force on how to spend the money because there's so much coming in. And I should have done more research on it, but So I guess so. Kind of moving on from that.
Okay.
From what you explained about tariffs, then it would appear that consumers end up paying for the tariffs, do companies eat those, or who pays for the tariffs?
Yeah, great question. So the common denominator in the empirical studies that are out there on tariffs is that the consumer pays the largest portion of the additional tax. Just as going back to my example of a sales tax, you're going to pay for that Coke by adding the 6% on top of it. You, the seller, is going to pass that charge immediately onto you, and that's exactly what happens for the most part with tariffs. But there again, I am with two hands. There are examples where the country that was exporting to us, or the people we were buying, they went ahead and lowered their prices by the same amount. But this is a rather small amount of examples where that is. But to your question, nowhere did the existing U.S. businesses pay that tax. And so some people want to argue that this is going to be a tax on business. And at best, in some examples, it's going to be a tax on the business in the other country if they keep importing the same quantity but are now doing it at a lower price. But the consumer either pays the tariff itself in a higher price for that import, or they pay the tax by paying a higher price for that product to a domestic manufacturer. And so the consumer is hurt. And so that's why you're hearing in the current news around this story is tariffs are going to be inflationary. They're going to raise the cost of living because they're so broad, they're across so many products, so many different countries that it's going to have an inflationary effect. And so that argument comes from these empirical studies of the past, where the prices of these goods went up, either in one form or another.
Okay, so now going to the flip side in my mind of this, what about all these countries that are currently tariffing and have been tariffing the United States? And he says, hey, you know what? Reciprocity. You give us a 10% tariff, that's what you pay to get in the U.S. How has the tariffs from other countries hurt the U.S.? And being in Idaho and being a kind of a farm podcast, especially farmers. So I guess just keeping it one purview right now, the reciprocity, is that a good idea? Since they're going to tariff us this much, would that lead to more free trade? And they say, you know what, forget it, we're not going to tariff you, you don't tariff us, let the best person win? Or what's your view?
Right, great. So this has been a very interesting part of all that's going on, all the uncertainty around this. So this has not been studied as much as tariffs in general. The right thing for me to say is we don't really know. There isn't a lot of historical evidence or a lot of understanding of this. Here's what I do know. Adam Smith himself suggested that reciprocity might be a good idea. That if a country is currently placing a tariff on a product that comes from your country to theirs, then you might do the same. But he said it's in order to bring them to the negotiating table and get rid of or at least reduce the tariffs altogether. So it's my expectation that that's what our current president is after. Let's try to bring them to the negotiating table. He hasn't said that, though. He doesn't seem to favor these broad trade agreements like the one we have with Mexico and Canada, for example. He just doesn't. He wants to go around those when he can. And so I don't know if that's really a strategy, but there is a logical argument for that might bring people to the table. With that said, many of the high tariffs that U.S. Companies face, higher than we're charging them, is because we simply don't sell that product in those countries. There's a lot of high tariffs on some luxury goods, for example, in poor countries. But by definition, poor people don't buy luxury goods, right? So, we don't end up exporting a lot, so that the tariff really has no actual real effect on it. So the reciprocity issue that with these proposals is that just creates more uncertainty, and it's really complicated given the number of goods, the number of countries, the number of different rates. Whereas a broad trade agreement like the one we have with Mexico just says this is going to be the rate for everything, or there's going to be zero rate for any of these goods. This very easy to understand tariff system. Again, going back to my sales tax example, it's easy to understand. Everything gets taxed at the same percent. But if we're going to exempt this product to the farmers, the potash exemption from Canada, for example, we're going to maybe do auto tariffs, maybe steel. This just creates so much uncertainty and so much confusion that it's going to slow down economic growth at the very least because of that uncertainty.
Okay. So I guess, building off of the theme of tariffs, one of the other reasons for, I think, the thought of, hey, we need to build more in the U.S. besides creating jobs and that kind of thing is, say, national security. So if we're in a war with, let's say, China or something like that happens, and we're getting a lot of our goods for them, we're kind of stuck if we're relying on another country for the goods that we need to survive and live. So I guess, is there an argument that can be said, and it could be, on one hand, globalization is great. On the other, you're at the hands of perhaps your enemies for stuff you rely on. I guess, is that the answer, or what would you say about that?
Sure. There's certainly an argument, and it's certainly a valid argument that if we need to build tanks, ships, and planes, we need the metal and other materials to do that with. And if we don't have a source to do that, then we're going to be at a military disadvantage. It's very logical, very understandable, reasonable argument. On the other hand, the more we trade, the less we fight, and history has shown that. If you don't allow, as one economist put it, if you don't allow goods and services to cross borders, armies will. So that argument was essentially that, the more we are trading with a country like China, the less incentive they have to interfere with us politically or militarily, which is essentially the same thing, right? So, right. But the idea being is that the increases in global trade that we've seen since World War II have prevented World War III. And that as well is a very reasonable argument. So the China is the one that comes up the most. And I would point people to Russia's inability to take over Ukraine in a couple of weeks like they thought they could, as to how less of a threat China is in doing the same to us, or for that matter, to Taiwan. They're probably looking at the expense and difficulties that Putin has had with his strategy and saying, why would we ever do that? And so this again, because it benefits them to trade rather than fight. And so furthermore, strictly my opinion, the ability that there would be no source of metal or the other materials we need to fight, it just confounds me. It's a much bigger world than just China. So if you go back to history, in a very short amount of time, we geared up to fight World War II. And we're quite successful. I don't have those fears that follow that argument. But like I said, okay. It's a reasonable, understandable argument.
Sure,
I simply don't have the fears that others do with that.
Sure. So. Okay. So another buzzword that's going around because of all this uncertainty and everything that's going on is recession.
Yes.
So, I think there's a lot of people out there that actually don't know what recession means. So if you explain that, number one, and then number two, what are the signs, historically speaking, what are the signs of recession? And then we'll say, hey, are we headed that way? But we'll go with the recession, what it is, and then what are the signs of it?
Great. All right. So along with this conversation of tariffs, everybody is concerned that the actions will cause a decline in economic activity. So that's your broad definition of what a recession is. I think a better definition is a recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose yours. And so it's this recession is a general downturn that's causing some industries, some people in some certain employments to struggle to find work. And so the recession historically has been measured as about 6 months worth of negative GDP growth, so a decline in gross domestic product. If you look back again historically, let's go back to World War II, that hasn't happened too often. So that recessions are relatively rare, and they've become more rare than they were in the early parts of that 90 or 100-year history that I'm talking about. And so the recessions are a decline in economic activity, and somebody's going to get laid off during that, or some businesses are going to have a harder time selling their goods. But it's not the end of the world. Recessions are talked a lot about in the news, just as downturns in the stock market are talked about. And the S&P 500 is down 7 or 8% in the last month. And so, is that bad? Well, it depends on whether you're buying or selling, right? Not necessarily. It might be bad for somebody that wants to retire right now, and now they have 10% less in their retirement account than they did last month. But it's not hurting everyone. It's not across the board, and sometimes it's good for the stock market to have those kind of corrections, if you would. But to get to one of the signs is a 20% or more correction in the stock market has been the most direct evidence that we're in some kind of recession. So that hasn't happened too often, but that's your key indicator. If investors are unwilling to hold shares in U.S. companies, which are some of the strongest, most profitable in the world, and they're holding cash instead, that's a good sign that the expectations are high for a decline in economic activity. A recent indicator from the Federal Reserve Board of Atlanta, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, indicates that we may be experiencing right now in this quarter of 2025, this first quarter, we might be seeing either a flat or a decline in GDP. And so that they would call that a recession. But, if it turns back next quarter, then it was really just a statistical blip, so to speak. And so other indicators come from the bond market. The bond market is something that I follow daily because I think it is a stronger indicator. There's more noise in the stock market than there is in the bond market, which is larger in terms of total dollar, and particularly larger outside the United States. And the bond market is not showing the same kind of worry that the stock market is right now. So the interest rates on corporate debt, as a good example, are only 1% higher than on U.S. Treasury debt, even though they have much more risk than Treasury debt has. So in times of recession, that gap or spread, as we like to call it, jumps to 10 or 15% higher interest rates for those companies. And we're not seeing anywhere near that. We're at a very normal spread between corporate debt and U.S. Treasury debt. Some have even argued it's pretty narrow, it's pretty small. And so those are signs of the economy's fine. That's an indicator, a strong indicator that the economy's doing well.
Okay, so it sounds like the indicators of having recession are not there per se right now.
Only the stock market is really suggesting it, but even then, it just might be a healthy correction to those prices.
Sure, and and I think the point that you brought up is extremely valid. Just because it goes down doesn't mean people aren't making money. People make money because it goes down, right? And nobody ever thinks about that. Yeah, betting against the market. Point. Yeah, yep. And if you're a young person or you're not going to retire for a while, buy now when it's down.
Exactly. So save a little more this month. It'll do you well in the long run.
So with everything looking okay, how strong do you think our economy really is then?
Oh, that's a great question. It's fabulous. And I think if you stop following your TikTok feed or reading the news, you'd realize it. Because the employment opportunities are wide. The amount of work that we have to do to have the same standard of living keeps going down. You can see that in things like the extent to which people are traveling, which if you go back 2 decades or to when I was a young person, as you said earlier, that was only for the rich to fly as much as people do today. Yeah. New cars seem pricey, but look at everything that's in that new car and all it can do, and the better gas mileage it gets, and the longer it lasts than it used to. There's just so many improvements. The amount of entertainment we have and can consume, the number of choices, 50,000 products in your basic grocery store today. There's just the amount of opportunity, growth, and progress in the U.S. economy is incredible. And if people don't believe me, I have one suggestion: travel and go see how the rest of the world lives. As I said, if you travel to Europe, you're going to see the same thing you see here. But if you go to lesser well-off countries like in Central America or Central Africa, you'll see how good you've got it. And I can point to the stories that we are reading here of why they're coming here, why the immigrant is arriving at the southern border of the United States. It's because our economy is so great and theirs is so much weaker. Even if theirs is growing, the the opportunities here are just so much better for it. So I can completely understand why they want to come here, and what they're trying to do.
Does inflation concern you at all? Or I guess let's put inflation in terms of this: inflation versus wage growth.
Yeah,
I am not in tune with that. You are, I assume. So how does inflation over the last, I don't know, whatever time period you want to see, inflation versus wage growth, how do they compare?
Yeah, that's a great idea. So a great way to look at it, I should say. So the inflation, as most widely measured by the Consumer Price Index, is trending or going higher than historical norms. We're at 3% inflation is well above the less than 2% that we experienced in the last 2 decades. So ever since COVID, inflation has been an issue and remains an issue. We're well above that by that particular measure. So that has been slightly offset, as you point out, by wage growth. So the real wages are higher than they were prior to COVID. So there's been inflation, but the median household in the United States is making more than enough to cover that. Now, with that said, my other hand again, that is, some people, what they have to buy is going up even faster. So inflation is really a personal issue. Whether somebody is experiencing a higher cost of living really depends on how they're trying to live. If you're trying to send a kid through college right now, or you've got an elderly parent with a lot of medical expenses, prices are hurting you. They're really putting some pressure on your household. But if you're retired and healthy, you're living the good life. Those prices that just are not hurting you. Or if your household isn't trying to pay for college and is just doing other stuff, their prices are not going to challenge you hardly at all. So it really depends on what it is you're trying to do, because only certain services, perhaps not surprisingly, those services that are heavily subsidized or regulated by the U.S. government, those services are facing a lot of price inflation. Whereas stuff like travel, which I mentioned before, or the computers that we're connecting on right now, all that stuff is getting much cheaper. So it really depends on what your household budget looks like as to whether or not you're experiencing the issues of inflation. So circling back, yes, inflation is elevated. It's higher than it's been usual, but that inflation has been driven by some particular services that not everybody buys. And so inflation is not hurting everyone.
Okay. Taking a turn here. I'm still in the ag equipment industry. And what we can see there is John Deere's laid off 2,500 people. CNH just announced today or last night laying off another 200 people. Across the board, it seems like everything is not very good for farmers right now. They're holding on to their money. Now, do they still have the money? That's a different question, but they're definitely hesitant or not purchasing at all. I guess first question off of that is, what do you think the reason for that is? And second, are any of these policies that you've heard the president talk about going to actually help farmers?
Yeah, terrific question. And my best answer is farmers have been too good for themselves. So another example here locally was Lamb Weston closing down a lot of their food processing stuff. So they're not buying tractors. There's just plenty of capacity in the entire food chain in the United States. So farmers are getting much more efficient in their fields. The John Deere is making tractors, just like I talked about with cars before, that last a lot longer and do a lot more. And so there's just amazing productivity gains, yield gains in the agricultural industry. There's been huge productivity advancements, technological advancements in food processing. So the United States continues to be that golden grain country that needs to do most everything that it can. And so it's generally been too good for itself. So there's been large productivity gains throughout the food system that are going to eventually lead to the layoffs and the decline in business that you're talking about. So will policies help the ag industry in that way? I don't think so. In his State of the Union address, he said, "Oh, I love farmers." But if we're going to limit imports, we by definition can limit the amount of investment that's coming into the U.S. and the opportunities that U.S. farmers have to export products and services. So let me explain that a little bit backwards. My second point is the easiest one. If we're importing there and they respond, they retaliate, as we've talked about already, then they're going to limit our opportunities to sell wheat or any other product outside the United States, and thus limit farmers' opportunities. President seemed to suggest that, wow, you can sell that to everybody here. Well, we produce a lot more food than we can eat, and in fact, we're eating less now that people are taking the new drugs that control their appetites, and so farmers should not want that to just try to sell more food to the United States. We're not going to eat it. We already throw away quite a bit of it. So for that reason, I don't think it's going to help. But here's something that I'm not sure the president is getting right in terms of economics. The fact that the United States has what is called a trade deficit, meaning we import more than we export, means by definition that we have a capital surplus. Meaning there's more capital coming into the United States than is going out. And if you think about that for a minute, that's only going to happen if people want to invest here, if they want their money to be in our banking system or in our stock market. And so the capital account surplus is a source of opportunity for us. It keeps interest rates lower than they would be otherwise. So this is again how the current policies could hurt the ag industry. If they do have the effect of reducing the trade deficit, by definition, interest rates are going to be higher than they would be otherwise, which makes it even more difficult to buy a new piece of equipment or simply have the land that you are farming on. So it's not, I can't see how these policies can help the farmer. So I don't know what he means by I love the farmer when he says it.
So what about when he says, I guess, forcing China to buy was it 50 billion worth of our ag products? Yeah. Does that help?
So that again is, if that's what he's trying to negotiate, great, but right now it doesn't seem like he's willing to negotiate. So that question goes back to Adam Smith's idea that, let's impose some retaliatory type of tariff in order to get people talking so that tariffs would all be reduced and trade will happen. Gotcha. But I don't see also how China can afford to buy that much from us right now. Their economy is declining more so than ours. Their growth is slowing down more quickly than ours is slowing down. So that's that. And there are a lot more places where we could sell that product if we traded with them as well.
Okay. All right. So you've been gracious with your time. I appreciate that. So I have kind of one last topic here, and I don't know how plugged in you are or what, but cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. We are going to be the biggest crypto or Bitcoin reserve in the world. What are your thoughts on cryptocurrency, maybe specifically being Bitcoin? If there are, on one hand, what are the advantages? On the other hand, what are the disadvantages?
Sure. So cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoin in particular, are all computer programs. They're algorithms, as most people understand now. And so these algorithms were designed in a manner so that people could transact businesses outside of the existing monetary system. That was their point. Let's find a way to interact and specifically trade using a digital or blockchain technology that allows us to do that business outside of the traditional monetary system. So it's no surprise that cryptocurrencies were initially quite popular with people doing illegal trades. But others have said that it's because it's outside of the monetary system, it's a better store of value. So if I create some value and I earn a lot of income, so to speak, I can hold that income in US dollars. I can put my money in the bank and just store my value there. But if I'm concerned that the issuer of that particular currency is going to deflate its value that by causing inflation or whatever other policy, then it's not necessarily a good store of value. So this has been Bitcoin's claim to fame, that the US government cannot deflate its value because it can't control the algorithm. It can't control the quantity. It can't. Well, there's where I stop. Yes, it can. So just as Roosevelt in the 1930s said, this is going to be the price of gold, the United States government could step in anytime it wanted and say, this is going to be the price of Bitcoin. Roosevelt actually said at that time it was illegal to hold gold, but people were doing it for the reasons I just talked about. They didn't want to hold dollars. And so he said, okay, I'm going to make it illegal. You can't do that. And so this is why Bitcoin can't ever live up to its promises. If more and more of our economic activity, more and more of our trading goes to cryptocurrency, which it hasn't gone anywhere near the extent that many of the people first thought it would 10 years ago or so now. People are simply not buying and selling in those electronic or digital currencies, as they're called. But if it ever does happen, guess who won't like that? The government. And so they'll stop or tax or do something to it, which would therefore hurt its store of value. And so right now, it's just the purest of speculation that there current being. There is no inherent true value in these items. The technologies that are behind them and the technological things we're learning from them are great. And those could turn into true products and services at some point that could really help us. But there's nothing of value in and of itself. And you can look at the price of Bitcoin and how much that has bounced around and now gone down to well below where it started at. It's sad that people are getting hurt and losing the farm, so to speak, in those investments, and that's pretty sad. And so I wish more people would understand the history that money is only money if the government says it's money, and so it's not. It's a very risky venture that they're in. And I mentioned the stock market's down 10% over the last month. Bitcoin is down even worse. So people are getting hurt.
I guess, do you think then that they had like a crypto summit at the White House where the Treasury Secretary was there? So is that a sign to you that maybe government is trying to become a little more hands-on with crypto and kind of own it and say, hey, you know what, if it's going to be out there, we're going to control that?
Exactly. I see that is probably the reason that when announced that he's going to create some kind of reserve of these currencies, the prices went down. It just goes against their founding. That was not what they were about. And the Federal Reserve itself has its own task force and a whole department that is creating a digital coin for their purposes. So will money become digital? Yeah, most certainly. For me, it practically is. I don't use currency very often. And so the technology gets, again, are great and potentially very useful. But does a separate coin, a separate money, not highly unlikely. And if a lot of economic activity moves over there, here comes the tax man, as they say.